TESOL Pop, Season 9, Episode 2. Hello and welcome to TESOL Pop, the mini podcast for busy teachers. My name is Laura, and joining me today to talk about common myths in teaching pronunciation is the founder of the hugely popular YouTube channel Pronunciation with Emma. It is, of course, Emma Walker. In this episode, Emma is going to tackle common myths in teaching pronunciation. Myths such as there's a certain profile of teacher who can teach pronunciation. Myths that accent and pronunciation are the same thing. And lastly, the idea that we can't spend an hour on teaching pronunciation. More on this in just a minute, but first let's jump to where I asked Emma, how did she get into teaching pronunciation as her area of expertise?
I think I started out as many English teachers, just kind of sticking to the textbook and teaching kind of general English. You know, I started teaching in summer schools and things like that. So everything was very general. And one thing I realized that was really, really lacking was pronunciation. And I realized that a lot of students really wanted to learn about pronunciation. And whenever I corrected their pronunciation, or we did a lesson on pronunciation, or even just 10 minutes at the end of the lesson, they really enjoyed it. But the thing that really triggered all of this, like the thing that started Pronunciation with Emma, let's say, is when I used to teach one-on-one classes back in Bristol. I remember my students would confuse how I said things. Like they weren't too sure how I was saying, like what I was saying, basically. So I would say things like, "Oh, do you have a car?" And they were like, "A car? What's a car?" And I'd be like, a car? Like beep, beep, you know, like a car. And they would just look at me like, what are you talking about? Like they would sometimes get it with the, you know, with the beep, beep thing. But sometimes I would have to write it down on the board. And they would be like, "Oh, car," or car. You know, they'd be trying to pronounce that R, you know, that R sound. And I would have to kind of explain, like, no. Like in many areas of the UK, we don't pronounce the R. So yeah, it's car. And then I would spend a lesson on teaching parts of pronunciation that would help them with their listening. So I actually started teaching pronunciation to help my learners with their listening and understanding, not to improve their confidence when they speak and for clarity. It all started with their listening.
That's so fascinating that it came out of that need of noticing your students struggling with differentiating between different sounds, different accents. In this case, the rotic accent of the R versus the non-rotic. And how that's often not covered in the course books that you're using. There isn't a lot of scope, particularly in the course books I've used in the past. I know course books have obviously developed and that they're working on that. The ones that we're using, I mean, I was using course books printed in the 90s.
So was I, yeah. There's a big difference now. I think they're really, like, textbook writers and course creators are starting to wake up and realize like pronunciation is actually important. It's not just a 10-minute filler or something you do at the end of the lesson. It's actually important.
Yeah, 100%. So in this episode, we're going to talk about myths and common myths surrounding learning and teaching pronunciation. The first one is quite common, not just for teachers, but for marketing materials that I still see schools use. And this is that there's a certain profile of teacher who can teach pronunciation. And teachers who don't speak English as their first language may doubt their ability to be effective role models in teaching pronunciation, or be the recipients of people marketing campaigns that kind of impress that upon them. Yeah. How can we tackle this massive myth as the first one in this episode as well? Let's start with the difficult one.
I mean, starting with the question, how do we tackle this?
Yeah.
It all starts with mindset shifting. And I think a lot of it isn't necessarily the teacher's mindset. It's, let's call them the customer's mindset. And I say customer because the customer might not necessarily be the student. It could be, for example, the student's parents who are paying for the lessons. And unfortunately, in some countries, they believe that if their children are exposed to the same air, you know, as a native speaker, they will sound like a native speaker. And we all know that that's just not true. If you feel that you're a teacher in this situation and you think, "Oh, I can't teach pronunciation because I don't feel I'm a good enough role model. We'll start with that one. For sure, you are the perfect role model for your students. You have been through the process of learning English as a second or third or fourth language. And that in itself is an inspiration to your students. So if your students can look to you as a teacher and say like, oh my God, Miss, whatever your name is, Miss Smith has achieved this level and I want to sound like her, you are inspiring that in your students. So give yourself some credit, you know. Your students really, really look up to you. And the second thing was, you know, if you feel that you can't teach pronunciation, it could honestly just be a case of not knowing how to teach pronunciation, if that makes sense. Like when I was doing my CELTA, I don't know if you did CELTA, but when I did mine, the pronunciation part was literally like an hour long. And it was just like going through the IPA and it was like, oh, well, you don't really have to learn it. It's not that important. No. And it was so brushed over. Like, can you imagine doing that with the grammar section? Like, oh yeah, here's a few tenses. La 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 la. I'm just moving on. Like, let's do listening. I don't know, something else. It's something that's so neglected in our teacher training. So sometimes we don't feel the confidence to teach it simply because we don't know how. And we don't know. It's like trying to, when you're a new teacher and your student asks you a question about grammar and you're like, oh my God, suddenly I don't know anything about English grammar. I don't know how to explain that. And you go into this moment of panic and then you're like, I hate teaching grammar, hate teaching it. But you hate it because you're just not quite equipped yet, you know, to explain things. So it might be worth, I mean, you're welcome, anyone listening or watching this, to take a look at my YouTube channel. I explain pronunciation there, so you feel free. Like you're very free to copy how I explain things. I remember there was a conference I went to, and some teachers, they recognized me, had like a moment of like, you know, so someone recognized me. They said, yeah. I actually watch your videos. And these were two guys from England, I think. They were like, oh yeah, we've seen your channel and we actually watch your videos so we can steal how you teach things and I can teach it to my students. And I love that because I feel like I'm kind of passing something on there. Like I'm not just teaching people who watch, I'm teaching teachers who can pass it on. So that's a good place to start. And then the more you get interested in it, you can take a look at books, take a look at courses, how to teach pronunciation. There are plenty. So yeah.
That was a really difficult myth to tackle, but you've talked about skill set, you've talked about teachers as learners, and the masses of resources, including your YouTube channel, that are there to help teachers grow confidence in teaching this skill. So it's not about your background in terms of what languages you speak, it's about your skill as a teacher. So moving on to the second one, and it's interconnected, and that's this notion that accent and pronunciation are the same thing. Yeah, you've heard this one before, right?
Mm-hmm. A lot. I hear it at least once a day. So there is a difference between the two, but they are like sisters or cousins, however you want to call them, but they are connected. So accent basically refers to the way you speak, depending on where you were born, where you were brought up, potentially your education, your background, your culture. It depends on so many different factors. When it comes to pronunciation, we're talking more about the specific way that we say the words. And the way that we say the words isn't necessarily connected to a location, if that makes sense. So, I can give an example like if we're teaching pronunciation and your student comes to the class and they say, this chair is very comfortable. Okay, very common. I hear that all the time in Spain. Comfortable is not an accent. Yeah, it's not what Spanish speakers would say. So if I corrected that and I said, oh no, it's comfortable, then I'm changing pronunciation. Then the focus is pronunciation. But let's say, for example, a student says car, and I say, oh no, in RP, it's car. Now I'm not changing pronunciation. I'm talking about accent. I'm teaching them a very specific way of saying the word. They could be easily understood by saying car. So hopefully that distinguishes the two. So they are connected. And when you teach pronunciation, you are also teaching an accent. You are teaching your accent because everyone has one. There's this big belief that, certain people don't have accents. But literally, once you open your mouth and you speak, you have an accent. What's interesting is that your accent might also change. Like, I think probably the first time we met, it was at IA TEFL last year. And I was in Yorkshire. I am from Yorkshire originally. And so my Yorkshire accent came out so much more. And people were surprised, like, oh, you're an English teacher. I've seen your videos. You don't sound like that, It's almost like they met this other persona, like they met the Yorkshire Emma.
Interesting what you say about these differences between pronunciation and accent. Like they are connected, but accent, there's lots of variations. Like there's RP as a minor kind of accent. Not many people speak that these days. But like the rhotic accent, like said, where the pronunciation of R is there, the non-rhotic accents where the R is dropped. It's down to just preferences where people are and whatever model is most comfortable for the teacher to use and the materials they're bringing in as well. But the other example you gave, that was an example of correction of error. And that's the difference there, right? Where there's an intelligibility issue because there's errors within the pronunciation of the word, no matter if it's an American pronunciation that the student's going for or whatever the accent, it's causing a strain for intelligibility.
That's it. And that is the difference,
Let's move on to the third myth. And that is you can't dedicate a whole lesson to pronunciation. In fact, pronunciation is this kind of like element that you just drop into classes here and there. Maybe it's a 5-minute activity, maybe if you fit it in at all, but a whole lesson, no way.
It really bugs me when I hear people saying things like, I can't plan a lesson entirely on pronunciation, because that's like saying, I can't plan a full lesson on reading. I can't plan a full lesson on grammar. Do you know what I mean? Like, we can happily plan lessons on the present simple, but we can't plan a lesson on the schwa. Like, yeah, you can. You just need to, again, know how to do it, because we're not taught during our teacher training. I mean, I can't speak for every course. I'm focusing more on the CELTA here, but we're not taught how to teach pronunciation and how to plan a pronunciation lesson, but it essentially follows a similar path, to everything else. If you're struggling to teach pronunciation and fill an hour, let's say, like you got an hour lesson, there are textbooks that do focus on teaching pronunciation and only pronunciation. My personal favorite is the English pronunciation. I'm trying to remember who wrote it. English Pronunciation in Use by Mark Hancock. That's his name. I should know that because he writes a lot. Actually, Mark Hancock's a really good guy to follow because he focuses on pronunciation and helps teachers teach pronunciation. He's really good. So his books are excellent. Some other ones are Ship and Sheep and Tree and Three. So Ship and Sheep is the intermediate and Tree and Three is the elementary version. That's by Anne Baker. So they're really good books. Even if your students are at a C1 level, personally, like I've materials from elementary books, like I've used stuff from Ship and Sheep with like C1, C2 level because the stuff is just so clear and the activities are so simple. So you can take those resources and turn those into lessons if you like, if you're really not sure, and that will kind of give you a bit of structure to your lesson.
It's been so enlightening talking to you today, Emma. Thank you so much for talking about these myths and sharing your expertise on the topic of pronunciation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
To find out more about Emma's work, then go to her website, pronunciationwithemma.com, or check out her Instagram and YouTube channels. Again, Pronunciation with Emma, and all those links are in the show notes so you can easily find them. If you have a question or you have an idea that you'd like to pitch for the podcast, you can contact us via Instagram, Facebook, or the website, TESOLpop.com. Finally, if you love what we do, you can support us by leaving a rating and review wherever you listen to the podcast, by sharing today's episode with your teaching community, or by even buying us a coffee at ko-fi.com/TESOLpop.